More of the backstory of Lobsterman, Maine's first superheroes. Brian and I established Mayfly Publication. We used the attempting to fly seagull as the logo. If you look at the corner of the comic, each issue, where the logo appears, I think the issues 2 through 10, it's there. And Mayfly was actually a composite. The bird, the illustration, the iconic seagull, or dump eagle, as I used to joke with Brian, was actually drawn by Brian's mom, Irene Pasillo. And Irene actually plays a very big part in the creation and function of Mayfly Publications. Irene actually snuck a few dollars here and there to support Brian and I in getting each issue out there. Now, the story goes like this. Once we established Mayfly Publications, Brian and I took on all of the roles. We wore all of the hats. We weren't just the comedy writers. We wrangled artists together, illustrators. Our favorite by far was Bob Scott. Second was Rob Groves. And a burgeoning artist out in Oakland, Maine, was a young fella. I can't remember his name right now. I'll think of it before I'm done. But we had to kind of corral these guys. We wanted to go with local artists. We wanted to make it a completely authentic Maine publication, top to bottom, front to back. So we used a couple of companies that did the interior. Was the Courier Gazette down in Rockland. They had done Fang magazine, so it was kind of an easy connection for Brian to lead us there. And Lakeside Graphics did the covers. And to me, even though the difficulty of being publishers and editors and so forth was surpassed by the joy of creating, you know, not just the writing aspect of it, but sitting down with Brian and coming up with these inane stories, you know, these absolutely outrageous lines and interactions between these two best friends and the silly villains that they fought. And of course, every issue had a fight or two, and some, underlying issue with bad guys trying to either corner the market in lobster fishing, which was Enrique Calamari. Calamari, yeah, he was known as the Squid. He was an import, an out-of-stater who came in and tried to own the entire Maine coast market and was doing a pretty good job. He came up with, what was the name of the enterprises? Calamari Enterprises. But he had a waterfront warehouse and basically bullied all of the fishermen that brought in their catch, whether it was crabs, clams, lobsters, whatever it was. Calamari was running all the way to Boston. He was closing out all of the other opportunities for any of the lobster fishermen to turn in their catch. Their alternative would be to drive all the way to Boston. And that's just counterproductive. You're losing money at that point. So they got entangled with Calamari. And it was at that point that Pearlie Stone and Charlie Kimball decided they needed to do something about it. And so they thought and figured out that they needed to put on costumes. And where did those costumes come from? Well, in the theme song, they put on costumes that didn't cost a dime. Well, it actually did cost them a little bit because they went to a church rummage sale. Charlie Kimball came out with a red union suit, a pair of blue boxers, and stitched together a cowl, a red cowl with a goofy crown on it. It was always getting in his face, and a U.S. Navy wool blanket for a cape, and he just used his waders for boots and a pair of utility gloves, and that was his entire costume. Now, Clammy, Pearly Stone, his was a little more complicated, but a lot more simple as well. Pearly would wear whatever he was wearing for street clothes, blue jeans, a checkered shirt, and he found an old winter hat, the kind that you have the flaps on the side. And most of the time they were up, but the strap was loose and they would flop down. He found a Lone Ranger type mask. And he had a green cape, also made out of a blanket that he found on a rummage sale. And as you read the comic, as you look at, the cover of number 4, you can see they didn't spend an awful lot on their costumes, but they put a lot into their character. And how did we come up with their character? Their fortitude was because they were Maine boys. And the morality came because that's what their families taught them, raising them to be honest, earnest, kind. You might, go down the list in the Boy Scout manual. Trustworthy, loyal, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent, the whole 9 yards. That was them. And in most of their fights, they ended up in brawls. And usually just the 2 of them versus as many as 20 of Calamari's thugs. And Calamari, he had some associates. One guy was Roddy Reeks. Roddy Reeks kind of smelled bad, so yeah, that was his name, Reeks. And Roddy was an independent contractor. Sometimes he was working for Calamari, sometimes he was working for himself. And yes, the name Rod Reeks. He was kind of a villain, but not really. If you know Rod Reek, he was the director of the Belfast Moosehead Lake Railroad for a period, and he was in the paper a few times. And Roddy, he read a couple of issues of Lobsterman, and he found his name in there, and he was quite thrilled. He actually thought it was quite comical. And the city manager was a guy named Dilk Dinkins. And we made him a classic politician, taking bribes here and there. And the character in the comic, you can see there's money coming out of his coat pocket. And smoking a big cigar. And he had idiots working for him, flunkies, Flunky 1 and Flunky 2. And yeah, that's kind of how the story developed with the supporting characters.